I really want to encourage parents and moms, especially, to wake up because we are
Mm.
living in a time when it's harder than ever to parent and disciple our kids. We have this tremendous opportunity right in front of us to change generations.
Welcome to the Homeschool Connections podcast. I'm your host, Kaitlin Zara, and I'm so glad you're spending some time with me today. New episodes drop every week, so make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell if you're watching on YouTube. All right, mamas, grab your coffee, press play, and let's homeschool together. Today, I am so excited to welcome Molly DeFrank to the podcast. Molly is a mom of 6 and best-selling author of Digital Detox and Mothering Boys, 2 books I absolutely love for their practical wisdom and heart-centered approach to raising kids. Thank you so much for joining me today, Molly. It is such a treat to have you here.
Thanks so much for having me, Caitlin. I'm so excited to talk with you today.
Yay. Oh, this is going to be such a good time. I'm really excited. I know I'm going to learn so much. Molly, there is a common theme among all of your work, and I see it as intentional connectedness with our kids, right? Especially as they grow. So I'm excited to center our conversation today around how we can stay close to our kids and keep our communication thriving. I know I learned so much about this just reading your latest book. And in it, you start by saying, we are in a battle for the hearts of our kids. And I love that. Can you unpack that for us a little bit?
Yes, absolutely. And you really did pull out the theme of pretty much everything I do. It's just being a little intentional, connecting with your kids. And that's right. I did start that book with we are in a battle. And I really want to encourage parents and moms especially to wake up because we are
Mm.
living in a time when it's harder than ever to parent and disciple our kids. We have this tremendous opportunity right in front of us to change generations. And, there are a couple of things, I put this in Mothering Boys in the book, a couple of pieces of data that I held together at the same time that really kind of inspired me to write it.
Mhm.
One of them is that a person's worldview is pretty much formed by the time he's 13 years old, which is
Wow.
pretty mind
Okay.
blowing. Yeah. And then the other one is that the time that we're raising kids, a child born today, by the time he turns 7, will have spent 1 full year of 24-hour days being digitally entertained.
Mm.
So we are just handing over these discipleship hours to a device if we're not intentional. So what I wanted to do, because also I'm talking about how high the stakes are, but I'm also a mom to 6, like you mentioned. And I am
Yeah.
no stranger to the struggle and the chaos and the stress and the overstimulation as moms. And just feeling like you're
Mm.
trying to just get everyone fed, you're trying to get the kitchen cleaned back up, you're trying to get kids from A to B, and you can feel so frustrated. You don't feel like Mary Poppins. You feel like you're twitchy and annoyed sometimes. And so I just am trying to bring this ideal, intentional mothering together with the chaos of the day to day and just really encourage moms that
Mhm.
it's little deposits. It's in the little minutia, the little
Mm.
interactions that you're building these connections with your kids that will truly change their lives. And I'm sure your listener is already investing in their kids by homeschooling their kids. So yeah, I love encouraging parents with this.
Oh, that's so beautiful. And I think already that's encouragement for all of us that it doesn't have to be in the big things. Sometimes we think we need like an overhaul. We have a bad day with our kids where we feel like, oh, nothing went well and I've got to change everything I'm doing. But like you said, Molly, it's really about the small moments and making more of them with our kids. And that is the perfect lead into what I want to know about next. In your book, you were talking a lot about having dinner with your kids and about how kids who have dinner with their families have statistically less cases of depression, anxiety, substance abuse. And I have to say, I am, as a homeschooling mom, as a devoted mom, as you are, I prioritize having meals together, but it is extremely difficult, even for the mom who is really, really trying. And I want to speak to the fact that I grew up in a household where we had dinner together every night. It was like my dad walked in at 5, mom had dinner on the stove, and at like 5:15 she was calling us downstairs and we all had dinner together. But why in 2025 am I finding that so much harder? It seems like it's so much harder than it was for my parents. Tell me about that.
Yeah, you're spot on. 60% of parents are not taking advantage of the benefits of having regular family meals together. And I think the main reason is that we're just busy. Our calendars are packed, they're full to the brim. We've got, you know, camps and practice and all kinds of things
Yeah.
going on that are filling the schedule to the brim. So I just really encourage parents to look for some time to carve out, whether that's dinner, whether it's even breakfast or lunch or a snack after school with a blanket on the lawn with some popsicles, just finding that time to kind of come together and unpack the day and share what's on your heart. The research is pretty compelling about how beneficial it is to do these family
Mhm.
dinners. And as you mentioned, but there was a really interesting quote I came across out of Harvard. Um, and it was that there was a family therapist who said, most of the work I get done in therapy would
Mhm.
like, I would be out of a job if more people had family dinners because most of the work I do
Wow.
is accomplished over the dinner table,
Wow.
which is pretty
Wow.
incredible. I think the other thing that deters parents from doing this is that it's hard. Our kids are learning how to be
Mhm.
civilized human beings and how to sit still at the dinner table and how to not elbow their sibling and how to chew with their mouth closed and ask kindly to pass the item. And so this is like very fertile training ground for manners and human
Yeah.
interactions. And sometimes we can just feel, man, I have so many memories of family dinners, or I would so frequently, we'd just sit down after making dinner after a long day, and one of the kids would be in the like had to run to the bathroom. And before I could take my
Mhm.
first bite, someone's beckoning me, like, can you wipe me? And I'm like, this is the
Yep.
least appetizing thing
Yes.
ever. It's like horrible. But that just take a breath and know that no family dinner looks like Norman Rockwell all the time.
Mhm.
You're going to do it 10 times and one or two of those times are going to be really sweet. So stay the
Yeah.
course and be patient with yourself, be patient with your kids. They're learning. It takes a long time and just do it anyway. Do it even though it's going to be hard.
I agree. It's letting go of that perfectionism mentality and thinking, okay, if they're really small, if we're working with toddlers here or large families like the beautiful family you have, if it's 10 minutes that you get where everyone is together, cherish that 10 minutes,
Yeah.
pray together, ask about each other's days. And I love that you mentioned in the book that it doesn't, I mean, dinner's great, that's ideal. But you give opportunities and ideas for breakfast and for lunch and for snack time. And I think that just releases some stress on mama's shoulders to say, if dinner time is not really working with our schedule, it's just about finding the time to connect wherever you can for a meal in the day.
Absolutely. Even dessert. If you're busy and not everyone's going to get home until 7:30 or whatever, bust out the Oreos. It doesn't even need to be complicated. You don't need to be
Molly, everyone will come running when we offer dessert.
exactly.
Moms, if you hear nothing else from this conversation, it's that dessert will bring them to the table
Yes.
every time.
If
It's
you
a
bake it.
great tip.
If
I
you bake it,
love
they will
that.
come. Yes.
Yes. I'm also thinking so much about, and this really is again both of your books, it really intertwines with both of them. When my mom used to call us downstairs, we were doing something like drawing in a notebook, and there wasn't that dopamine crash when we put down an iPad. Right? So now when you're talking to a child that might be using a device, maybe they're a little bit distracted and there's that dopamine crash when they put down the iPad to come down for dinner. So there's a real difference there in lifestyle. And I want to speak to that and also a little bit of why are we in a place where we have so many children that are struggling with depression and anxiety? Is it connected?
Absolutely. I'm so glad you touched on that because here is one of the hard truths right now is that parents don't want to say out loud. And our kids' devices are bringing out the worst in them. And
Mm,
there are sometimes when parents don't want to sit across from their kids because their kids are so grumpy or rude or
mhm.
raging or just annoying behaviors are popping up and they're like, "Honestly, I'd rather just pop him in front of the TV or in front of his tablet to eat his dino nuggets because at least I get a break." So my
Right.
heart goes out to you if that's where you are. And honestly, that's where a vast majority of parents are. 75% of parents
Yeah.
say that their kids' relationship with their device is the most stressful thing about their parenting. So let's just remove the shame from this conversation because, like you mentioned, there is a physiological change that's happening in our kids' brains due to this
Mhm.
device use. And that's exactly what my first book was about. It's how to break that stronghold that our kids' devices have over their
Yeah.
hearts and minds. And I just want to encourage parents, if that's you, like there's no shame in that. We're our generation of parents has gone through this together, and you can absolutely break free from that and help your kids. But it really just goes back to the dopamine, like you said. And, you know, just to very briefly explain this, our brains release dopamine when we experience anything enjoyable or pleasurable. You eat a bite of cake, dopamine is released. You hug a loved one or go for a walk, dopamine is released.
Mhm.
Well, these brilliant engineers have taken what we know about how to release dopamine in the brain, and they've baked dopamine release points into the games and apps, even yes, even the tablet apps that are labeled educational.
Yep.
Our kids are getting such giant amounts of dopamine in their brain that in fact dopamine receptors in the brain are going numb. They're dying. So now it takes more dopamine to get the same
Yep.
amount of enjoyment you once got from, less dopamine. So now when you turn off the screen and your kid falls apart, they're not trying to be a jerk. You're watching a dopamine crash in real time. They've gone from 1,000 to zero and they're falling
Yeah.
apart. That's also why when you try to have a sit down meal after their dopamine is raging, they're not
Mhm.
interested. This is boring to them. Why, when you send them
Mhm.
outside and you say, go play, it's fun. And they go, that's boring. It's physiological. They don't even register that it's enjoyable. So there's a
Yep.
huge element of our kids' device use. 40% of 2-year-olds have their own iPads right now. So these brains are just dopamine central. And I
Yeah.
really encourage parents both in this book and in my first book to get in front of that device use issue in the home. If that's you, I have a lot of really helpful tips to do that. But that will also
Mhm.
completely transform your dinner table and all around the clock, your
Yeah.
family culture.
I agree. And being connected with our kids, we've got the devices, we've got the, like you said, being overscheduled, which so many of us are. I think also in the last 5 years, we've seen parents maybe transition to working from home. And then it's kind of like we're always working, we're always
Yeah.
on with devices at home and work. So it really is a challenge. And Molly, I have my eldest is 8, and he is still my little love, and he's still very much my child. But I see that the progression of friendships and his, having his own independence in his own life is right over the horizon, right? So you speak a lot to staying connected with our kids as they get older. And that's really a challenge. And I think a lot of people feel that they're connected when their children are younger, like my 8-year-old, but that it gets harder and harder as they get older. And that's definitely a concern that I have. It's something I worry about because I want to keep this relationship. So, can you tell us a little bit? I know in the book you give even some prompts for questions to ask to stay connected. But how do we do that as our children go from children to young adults?
Yeah, absolutely. And, I think it was Sally Clarkson who said that parents have this magical window of influence in the hearts of their kids between 4 and 14 because your
Mhm.
kids still think you're really cool. And if you like
Yeah.
something, they like it. If you're reading your Bible, they're curious about doing that too. If you're
Yeah.
going for bike rides and staying active and eating healthy food, they're going to want to do that too.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you have dads listening to your podcast too or if it's just moms,
Yeah.
but dads have such a huge impact. So you look no further than I bet you if dad has a special NFL team or baseball team that he loves,
Yeah.
you look at the kid, I guarantee your kids like that same team.
Yeah.
And it's not because you said you better like
Mhm.
this team. It's because they caught it. So
Yeah.
that's really huge. And we get to really connect with our kids. And part of that is, and I talk about this at the beginning of the book, just imparting value and a sense of belonging in your kids that they know that you're their people, you're their parents, nothing will change that. And acknowledging at the same time that as they grow, when they get into those tween and teen years,
Mhm.
it's going to look a little different. I got a 12-year-old son going into 7th grade, and I have a 14-year-old son going into 9th grade. And I sure have noticed, we get little glimmers of that. One of my sons is super like cuddly, and the other one just isn't.
Yeah.
But they both
Right.
will go through these stages where, I pick them up from practice or a friend's house and I'm like, tell me all about it. I want to know all this stuff. And they're just like, I don't really want to talk about it right now. I'm like, oh no,
Mhm.
I want to hear all this stuff. But
So what do we do? I'm gonna stop you and tell
yeah,
what do we do when that happens? What give me a strategy for when they kinda shut down and they're not ready to talk.
I think I have found the best thing is to give them a little space and say, that's fine, bud.
Mhm.
Let me know when you want to chat about it. I'd love to hear about it. Turn up
Yeah.
the
Yeah.
radio, hand him the ice water you brought him. listen to
Yeah.
music. Later on, I find the best options are go for a walk. Take a 5-minute walk. Hey,
Mhm.
it's my sons take turns walking the dogs. Like, hey, I'll go with you.
Mhm.
Even though I'm tired and I don't really want to, but I know,
Yes.
in my head, that's what I'm saying. But I know that if I am willing to give up 10 or 15 minutes, by the end, I'll be so glad that I did. And
Yeah.
that's where the heart stuff sort of unpacks itself. It's like
Mhm.
proximity. And honestly, it's so important, especially for our boys. 2/3 of young men say, no one really knows me today.
Mhm.
They are just getting swallowed up whole by video games and device
Mhm.
overuse, and they're not having these relationships that they need in order to really flourish for the rest of their lives. And this effort that we're putting in is so important because they did a study. It's called the Harvard study. And
Mhm.
they wanted to predict longevity and health. And so they studied groups of men from when they were in their 20s all the way through until they died. And they looked across different income levels and education levels and health and cholesterol levels. And they measured all this stuff. And
Mhm.
do you know what they found was the best predictor of longevity and happiness? It was
Tell
not,
me.
yeah, this was so exciting. It was not exercise regimens. It was not income. It was not education. It was quality relationships. Quality relationships at age 50 determine longevity and health at age 80. So it is so important that we teach our boys, especially, how to navigate and cultivate good relationships, especially now, because this study started decades ago, but now boys are even lonelier than ever. So as moms, we tend to be a little more relationally
Mm.
attuned, I think, than
Yeah.
men. So this
Yep.
is something that we have this honor and this responsibility to build our son's capacity for connection and this back and forth kind of,
I love it.
reciprocity. And it's just really beautiful, this opportunity that we have.
Wyoming Catholic College's freshman class just returned from a 21-day wilderness backpacking trip full of stories and friendships, ready to plunge into the primary sources of the classical liberal arts tradition. If your homeschooling student has a thirst for adventure and a deep desire to pursue truth at the very heart of things, we would love to welcome them at Wyoming Catholic. Molly, as you're speaking, I'm thinking back to what you said first, which was that you were there to pick your son up. And even just showing up to pick them up and to be the one that does that, they realize it takes effort. And I think that we're in a culture right now where it's really easy, and maybe I see this on social media, that motherhood is a burden, that we're chauffeurs, right? You're just a chauffeur, like it's a passive job that you have to do and it's a burden. And I think that's one of the enemy's lies because it's not a burden to go pick our kids up. It's an opportunity. And so I think it's so important that you were just there, even if he's not ready to talk. Maybe he's hot, he's sweaty, it's been a long day, maybe it was a hard practice, but it is not a burden to quote unquote chauffeur our kids. It's a privilege and it's an opportunity. And I'm sure as I'm saying this, I see you nodding, you feel the same way.
That is such a great point. And honestly, we need each other to remind ourselves, to remind each other of that, because I don't think there are any moms who who are going through the difficult parts of motherhood and always feeling great about every single thing they're doing. I think that
Hmm.
we all, sometimes we're like, "Oh, I can't wait to get there and hear what went on." And sometimes it's like, "I'm so tired. I do not want to go drive down there." But we need that reminder. It reminds me of in the Bible where it says, count it all joy when you
Yeah.
face trials of many kinds. And it's like, I think that word is an accounting term because when you face trials, at least for me, I'm not walking into a trial like, woohoo, I have so much joy. I'm so happy. That's
Right.
not how I feel. But when you step back and, like you said, you have to kind of tell yourself the truth rather than listen to your gut shot, like your immediate response saying like, I'm so tired, I don't feel like doing this. You kind of need to coach
Mhm.
yourself and say, you know what? This time of chauffeuring my kids is very small. And
Yeah.
this is a battle I have too. If we miss the bus for my big kids, I'm driving a bunch of different schools in the morning. And
Mhm.
sometimes I'm thinking I'm frustrated because I'm like, oh man, I had this thing scheduled. Now I missed it. Now I've got 20 minutes.
Mhm.
And then every time after I actually drive the route, I'm like, man, why was I complaining about that? that is some individual time I got with these kids who my oldest
Yeah.
is about to have her license in October. And
Mhm.
really, the time I get to spend with her side by side in the car is just coming to an end. So, why would I wish away that time just so I can get to Costco a little sooner? It's kind of like backwards. But
Yeah, but we need that reminder. It's so
yeah,
human. It's so normal that we'd feel that way.
yeah, so true.
And, Molly, our situation right now, we're homeschooling our 2 sons, and my older guy, he is going to a co-op, and there are no co-ops in our area. So, the one that we found and that we love is about 38 minutes door to door. And I've got my younger one at home, and my husband is the one who drives my older son, Rocco. And at the beginning, it was like, "Oh, maybe this is gonna be really hard because you're losing, part of your workday that you have to drive him and then find somewhere to work and then drive home at 3 o'clock. You're losing, my husband should be working from 9 to 5, right? That's 38 minutes of father-son conversation in the morning and in the afternoon, and my husband now, we both feel it's a tremendous blessing. It's a gift that we would otherwise not have had, and so it really is just a perspective shift. It can be harder. We all have bosses and jobs and lives and things to keep up with, but just like you said, that time is fleeting. We're not always gonna need to drive him, and it's such valuable time. If you want to even speak a little bit, Molly, to that father and son relationship, because I know so much of your focus is boys being raised, with these wonderful virtues, being masculine. And I'd love to hear a little bit about that.
Yeah. Dads are so important. My dad was a phenomenal father, and I think that his ability to be relational and caring had such a
Mm,
massive impact on me because it reflects the love of God. It's a reflection. The
yeah.
way that we parent our kids is really a reflection of who God is. That's the design for family. We're his
Mhm.
children and we get to reflect him to our kids. It's such an honor. But you're talking about the car ride and that co-op ride. Um, it made me immediately think of driving with my dad I grew up in Southern California and we took a road trip, I think my junior year of high school. And we drove all the way up to Northern California and toured a couple of colleges. And, I just remember little snapshots of the colleges we visited. But really, I think the best memory was driving together and just having
Yeah.
fun conversations and showing him some of the popular music at the time and him in his like sweater vest, like rocking out to these like random rap songs or whatever. But he was willing to like get in the weeds with me and he cared about me. And the research is actually pretty incredible about the impact dads have. And I shared it at a men's breakfast a couple of, it might have been
Mhm.
a year ago, but it's kind of frustrating for moms because dads have to put in a little less effort to have the same amount of impact as moms. And that's okay because moms
How
are up for it.
interesting.
But like
Yeah.
one example of that is reading. So, reading for pleasure, they've
Mhm.
done studies that show that if kids just see their father at home reading for pleasure, they're more likely to pick up a book and read for pleasure. But a mom
Mhm.
sitting around reading a book for pleasure doesn't have the same impact, which I thought was super
Very
interesting.
interesting.
I know. So anyway, yes, dads are critical. They're so important. And a wife and a mom who loves and respects her husband and speaks highly of
Mhm.
their kid's dad, like you're giving your
Yeah.
kids a gift and you're also showing your boys like, hey, this is what you should look for in a wife one day. Look for
Yeah.
someone who talks you up and who builds you up and who wants to
Mm.
serve and love you and dads too. Like you're showing your daughters this is how you should want to be treated. How do you want your daughters do you want them to settle for someone who's just mediocre or do you want them
Right.
to find someone who's loving and serving and doting on them and I'm grateful that I had a great example from my dad. So my husband, I had super high standards and he met them and I'm so grateful, but yeah, all of these things are just gifts from God and opportunities to reflect his character to our kids.
That is so beautiful. I have nothing to say back. That was perfect. That was so wonderful, Molly, and so true. And I think, we're talking about how we can speak to our spouse, how we can speak to our children. And I really want to end on this idea of how we speak to ourselves as moms. And in your book, I'm going to read it right from the book, but you shared your innermost thoughts at the beginning of the book. And it was so humbling to read because I think all women, all moms feel this way at one time or another. But I'm so thankful that you shared it so candidly. You said, quote, so, and this was self talk. You were saying this, recalling thoughts that you were having. So you don't earn money now? Why isn't the house sparkling clean if you're home? Why aren't you more fit? I can tell you, I've had these thoughts. My friends have had these thoughts. And to the mom, especially maybe speaking to the heart of the homeschool mom who's home with her children, what can you tell us to encourage us if we are having these thoughts ourselves now?
I would say that is not how God talks to us. That is not how he talks
Mm,
to you. That is not the voice of the God who made and loves you and calls you to the work in your home. It's interesting to me that another name for the devil is accuser. And I think I have to catch myself on some of these days. And like you just read, those questions are so accusatory. And ultimately, at the end of the day, I need to say, yeah, I'm not going to be perfectly fit or make $1 million or even love my kids perfectly. I'm going to fall down
mm,
every day. And thank you, Lord, for the grace of Jesus that covers every single shortcoming I have, and for the Holy Spirit that empowers me to obey God and to reflect the love of a good father to my kids, and that I can just get up and with a smile use my gifts without fear of condemnation. And so then I can actually mother my kids with joy. Um, and really see them as a blessing, not the burden that sometimes we're tempted to see them as. So I would just
mm,
encourage you, sometimes I'll make myself, I did this with my teenage daughter too. She was so down on herself. And I said, you know what? Would you ever talk to a friend like that? Would you ever say these things to a friend? To if one of your friends had exactly the same issues or whatever they were dealing with that you just described to me, what would you say to her? Just tell me what you'd say.
yeah.
And the narrative was completely different. It was encouraging and sweet and kind. I'm like, talk to yourself like that. That's how God is wanting you to hear him, and get in his word and see how loved and cherished and valuable you are. So, just to encourage your listener, you are loved and cherished and valued. And I guess one thing I'll end with is we homeschooled for about a year. I had a third grader and a
Yeah.
second grader, a couple preschoolers. It was hard work and I was stressed out a lot of the time. I really admire you homeschooling mamas, but I remember pulling aside at our co-op a mom who'd been homeschooling for maybe a decade, and her kids were phenomenal kids. They were just
Mhm.
respectful and engaging and sweet, and they were older than mine. And I said, "Can you give me some advice? Like, tell me if
Yeah.
you could tell yourself something, 10 years ago, what would you say?" And she said, "You know what I would say? I would say do less." And I was like, "What? What does that
Mm,
mean?" And she said, "I just become it's so easy to get overwhelmed and feel like I need to stack all these things on top of each other, but your presence with your kids and your warmth and kindness and taking one thing at a time and trusting God with just what's right in front of you is powerful, and it's forming the hearts of your kids." And I'm like, wow, that was not what I expected, but I still hear that over and over again. It applies to everything, like schedules and overscheduling and just trying to make our kids' childhood magical. It's like, what if we did less? What if we were content with throwing a blanket on the lawn or driving to the park and spending 30 minutes, or you know what I mean, just enjoying slowing down and enjoying things. And that's really powerful.
It's so powerful. I don't know if you saw my face change. If you're watching on YouTube, maybe you did, but I got emotional listening to you because as soon as I read those quotes and I thought about how really almost all of the women I know have had these thoughts.
Mm,
I'm like, God would never view me this way.
no.
He thinks I'm doing a great job. Why am I so hard on myself when he's watching me wash those dishes? And if the kitchen isn't clean or, there are crayon marks, my dining room table is destroyed and it's okay with me. But why am I worried about any of these things? And he sees us, he sees what we are doing with our children every day. And it is more than enough for him. He sees us glorifying him, doing this motherhood thing, and it is more than enough. So if you're listening Mamas, this was a really good one, Molly. Thank you for everything you just said. That was so beautifully said. Any last thoughts that you'd want to share with our audience before we close things out today?
I just want to encourage any moms listening that God called you specifically to your children at this time, at this season, with all the screen time, with all the stress, with all the activities.
Hmm.
And you know what? When we put Him at the center and we love our kids faithfully, don't underestimate the generational impact you are having as a mom. And it's happening in the minutia of your day. It's not in the big, sweeping, fancy things. It's across the dining room table. It's with the broken crayons. It's over the kitchen sink washing another dish, and you're doing
Yeah.
phenomenal work.
So beautifully said. Molly, thank you so much for joining me. For more information about Molly and links to purchase her book, see her social media, all that good stuff, be sure to check out the show notes below. I'll have links to everything. Molly, thanks again.
Thanks so much.
This isn't the end of the conversation. I want to hear from you. Come say hi on Instagram, connect with me on Facebook, or leave a comment below. I want to know what today's conversation sparked in you. I read and respond to every message. Until next time, remember, you got this.